Chương trình này được bảo trợ bởi.
Để biết thêm chi tiết, mời quý vị vào trang covid19.ca.gov.
Hi, welcome to the OC Health and Education Show on Little Saigon Television. I am your host, Julie Diep. To us, OC stands for our community because we believe our community thrives when we come together. Let's come together each week on Tuesday, 7 p.m. on 56.10 to talk about the issues that really matters to our community. If you want to, you can also follow us live on Little Saigon TV. Today, we have a very special guest. That's Judy Mark from Disability Voices United. Judy is here to talk about the importance of self-advocacy and for our viewers to understand that disability rights are civil rights. Julie Diep kính chào quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV trong chương trình Kiến Thức, Y khoa, Gia đình và Xã hội. Hôm nay Julie mời được chị Judy Mark from trung tâm là Disability Voices United. Hôm nay chúng tôi sẽ nói về đề tài của Disability Rights, làm sao quý vị có giúp được mỗi người trong gia đình. Judy, welcome to the show and thank you so much for setting aside your valuable time to share of all the great things you're doing in our community.
Thanks for having me, Julie.
Well, first of all, we know you from all the work that you do, the advocacy work. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what got you to this point?
Well, thank you for asking. So my background is actually not in disability rights work. I worked for many years in Washington, D.C. as an immigrant rights advocate. I actually was part of the movement of bringing Vietnamese refugees to the United States back in the late 80s and into the 90s. And I did that work in Washington, D.C. to get better laws for immigrants and refugees for many, many years. I worked with public policy and understanding how if we tell the stories of people who are most affected, that it actually can move the government, it can move our legislators, our elected officials to be able to do the work that we want them to do. And so I used to have these press conferences in Washington, D.C. filled with immigrants and refugees to talk about how much they're contributing to America. And then in the year of 1997, I had a child. I had my first child named Joshua. And Joshua developed very slowly and missed a lot of his milestones. And by the time he was 18 months old, he had a diagnosis of autism.
Wow.
And that just kind of changed my life and moved me towards where I am today.
Judy, that's so important for us. You know, you may or may not know, I was actually one of the boat people that came from Vietnam. And I came here in 81. You probably single-handedly even helped my family come over here. So for that, I thank you. Quý vị, Judy chia sẻ với chúng tôi đó là công việc của Judy hồi xưa là giúp về immigration cho mấy người tai nạn là immigrant từ Việt Nam qua. Gia đình của Judy cũng từ 81 cũng qua được Mỹ. Thì Judy là hồi xưa làm cái việc policy cho immigration. Hiện tại thì Judy có một cái đứa con bị tự kỷ. Thì lúc đó Judy mới chuyển qua công việc để giúp cho gia đình nào có con bị khuyết tật. Judy, thank you so much for all that you do for immigrants and now transitioning into the advocacy component for disabilities. So what does that mean? Do we have to have formal training, or is it just a passion or a heart project for you to get into?
So as my son grew up and I realized that he needed to, that he had so many issues that nobody was responding to, whether it was the school district not responding to his needs or regional centers, which are nonprofits who are supposed to be providing services or funding services, or service providers or behavioral therapists who are not really providing us anything that actually helped him improve his life.
Yes.
I started getting involved in the disability community and realized that there was this great need for someone with a background in policy and communications. California is a very different place than Washington, D.C. I actually grew up here. I grew up in Downey. And after my son was diagnosed with autism and we had a second child, who's now 21 years old, we realized that the lifestyle in Washington, D.C. was going to be very hard. So we moved back to California, and to have my family help, with my son. And I realized very early on that in the disability organizations that I offered to volunteer for, that they really didn't understand what it means to change systems. They might understand what it means to help an individual. Yes. So let's say you're a mom and your child just got diagnosed with autism and you don't know what to do about it. There's lots of organizations that can help you, that can guide you, that can give you, critical information. Yes. Or let's say you're even having a problem with your school district. There's advocates and lawyers that can help represent you at an individual educational plan or an IEP meeting. Mm-hmm. That's just not the same. There's just not a lot of people here who understand that we need to push for all school districts to get better, or all regional centers to get better, yes, so that we're not having to represent each individual person. And so one of the ways that I realized this was back when I first started getting involved, which was about 2010. I realized that there are really, that we have no power, that families and people with disabilities have no power in the state of California. That who has the power? It's regional centers who have paid lobbyists in Sacramento. Mm-hmm. It is school districts who have paid lobbyists in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. It's service providers who have those same paid lobbyists. Mm-hmm. We have no one. We are powerless. And I started trying to build a disability rights movement. And one of the things that we really focused in on was the fact that we as individuals don't have a right to decide what our lives are like as people with disabilities.
And I think,
Judy, we started a movement called self-determination, mm-hmm, where people actually can control what it is they do every day, which is very different than what most people with disabilities get to do. And that was a very successful movement. I'm happy to tell you more details about it if you're interested. But that was a very successful movement. And out of that movement, we created Disability Voices United, which is an effort not only for people with autism and developmental disabilities, but across all disabilities, to really build this movement to create our power in the state of California.
Well, thank you, Judy, for that wealth of information. Now, I'm going to try to recap that.
Okay.
So I would say, first of all, thank you for taking the time and putting so much heart into what you're doing. I think it's very important that our families understand that, in order to access services, sometimes we have to change the system instead of fighting small battles. And I really commend you for that. Thưa quý vị, Judy Mark sẽ chia sẻ với chúng tôi đó là cái công việc của Judy là chú ý về không phải là giúp cho một gia đình hay một trẻ em hay một học khu vân vân đó, mà thiệt ra là change cái system. Đó là chừng nào Judy đi làm advocate cho mỗi gia đình at the federal level hay at the state level á, trong bang Cali hay hơn đó, thì đó là nó thay đổi rất nhiều cái công việc hơn. Trước nhất á, là tại Judy có một đứa con bị tự kỷ, thì Judy hiểu là với có nhiều cái kinh nghiệm á, là lúc mà Judy đi tới học khu tìm chương trình cho con hay đi tìm nhiều cái dịch vụ đó, thì và tới chỗ mà của regional center, rất nhiều gia đình có con khuyết tật, rất nhiều cái khó khăn để cho tìm được cái chương trình để cho giúp gia đình. Thì hôm nay Julie hy vọng có nhiều thời gian nói chuyện với Judy thêm. Judy, thank you again for sharing that information. I think that's very important that you help to create Disability Voices United and continue to serve that. In a few minutes, we're going to go on a commercial break. But can you just recap it briefly about what Disability Voices United, what is your mission in that organization?
Absolutely. So Disability Voices United is the only organization in California that does statewide advocacy, but that is completely directed by people with disabilities and their family members. And we are, all of us, every single paid staff member and every single board member and volunteer are people with disabilities or their family members. We advocate for four things. First, for choice and control over our lives. Which doesn't always exist in the traditional system. We advocate for a reduction in racial and ethnic disparities that we've seen in the systems that support people with disabilities.
Judy, after this commercial break, we're going to let you finish that train of thought. But thank you again. Cảm ơn quý vị đã tiếp tục theo dõi chương trình Kiến thức y khoa gia đình và xã hội. Sau phòng quảng cáo, chúng tôi sẽ tiếp tục nói chuyện với Judy Marks của Disability Voices United. Xin cảm ơn.